I was born in the Isle of Man, which is a little island in the Irish Sea, 33 miles long and 15 miles wide, so it's small. A beautiful place, Celtic tradition, dark and light, full of folklore, full of witchcraft, full of fairies, full of potions, full of everything that you can imagine. And it seems to have a little bit of scenery from every part of the world. When you're a child, there's something very magical about the fact that wherever you are in the island, you can hear the sound of the sea. So that the rhythmic music is always there in the background of your consciousness. And it's what you miss first of all when you leave the island. The island is independent. It has its own parliament, its own stamps, its own money, etc., etc. But it does have a Governor-General, which means that it's associated with the English Parliament. During the wartime in the island, alien, it's really the wrong word to use nowadays, but people who were in this country, who were foreign to the country and were within, I think, 16 miles of the coast, were all moved to camps, as were some people who were moved to camps because they were considered dangerous. And some of these camps were on the Isle of Man. In the Isle of Man, the sense of community is very strong, so many of the families of the people living there met some of the people from the camps, because they gave lectures, they did all sorts of things. They were an incredibly talented group of people. And it's then that my father heard a little bit about something called the ballet Jooss and met some of the people who were associated with it. My father died when I was quite young, so that's about all I know. Later on, in the Isle of Man, in the secondary schools, we had the most wonderful ballet teacher. Every child, almost every child, went for ballet classes. These took place in the school gyms. The teacher was called Monica Moody. I don't know what her original name was, because she married Judge Moody in the Isle of Man, who was much older than her, and he encouraged her to do what she did best, which was to dance and to teach. After 3 years of working, she founded a little company, and after even more time, she took that company on tour, and I was one of the dancers. We were all carted off on the boats, on the train, came to London, to St Pancras Town Hall, where we presented our programme. But on the way, the records got lost, well, broken, because at that time shellac records were all you had. And myself and Frank, one of the boys from the company, we had to go to the BBC headquarters and broadcast a plea for our music, otherwise there would have been no performances. And my solo, which was from Les Patineurs, that was the last piece of music to arrive. So I did dance in London when I was very young. And it was exciting, and some of that excitement lives with you. I think in the Isle of Man, everybody is a performer and everybody is an artist, just like everybody is communally conscious. So when it came to training, what I wanted to do was be a dancer. And what my mother wanted me to do was to get a qualification. So I spent a year, no, it was longer than that. I spent 3 years training to be a teacher. But fortunately, there was a dance teacher in the college, and this dance teacher had trained with Rudolf Laban. Her name was Rosemary Pierce. She must have been an excellent teacher because we were all excited by the work we did. And I was lucky because I didn't have to do the paperwork qualifying to be a teacher without any time for dance. But of course it wasn't professional, the level of training. It was done in an educational environment and to develop the creativity of all of the students. after I qualified, I had to teach for a year. And I was very lucky to have a supervisor called Miss Jarvis, who said that she really thought I should get as soon as possible into the professional world. And she managed to get me some money from the Charles Henry Foyle Foundation, which is the huge Foyle's books business, which now still exists. It was very small, it was £200, but that was then the earth. And similarly, Lisa Ullman, who was the director of what was called the Art of Movement Studio, got me a grant from Bill Elmhurst, the youngest son of the Elmhurst family, who had sponsored Kurt Jooss and the Ballet Jooss when they came to this country. Otherwise, it would have been very difficult. I did the audition by going to a summer school, presenting my solo and my ideas for the choreography, and Laban was watching. And so I did meet Laban, and I did listen to Laban. And he said to me at the end of my performance that he thought I should go to Folkwang. Well, I didn't know what he was talking about. I hadn't a clue. But I did know that it sounded like I would have to go abroad and that there would be no money for that. As I said to him that I thought that might be a bit difficult, he said, well, you can go to Lisa then. Lisa, who was sitting beside him, I don't think she liked being treated as second best to Folkwang, but she did offer me a place, and I did go to study at the studio. I began to understand that there was something very different about the training which we had at the studio. And it was quite a while before Lisa even began to talk to us, the three of us who wanted to dance, about her background. And I realized that she was very much the kind of person who came over to this country at the before the Second World War, the kind of person that my father was also excited by. And that was a good connection for me. I spent 3 years training at the studio, and in the last year we had a little performance group. The main choreographer was one of the teachers called Atherley Knowles, who had worked with Sigurd Leeder at the Sigurd Leeder School of Dance in London. In that year also I first met Sigurd because Geoffrey and I, from this little group, we went to take class with Sigurd twice a week. The second one on Saturday mornings was a longer class, and that was also exciting because he was an incredible personality, a very fluid personality, a very good performer, and also musically highly intelligent. So that seemed to be it at that time. I had a training, I had performance experience, I had a teacher's certificate. But when I look back on that now, I know that that was really nothing. That was just the beginning. Lisa asked me to stay at the studio as an apprentice teacher, which at that time, as I knew nothing, I was perfectly confident to say I could do. When I look back on this, I think, I wonder how those students actually respected me, because I was just this young person who'd done some training and was educated. But in the world of the dance, the world of the professional dance, of performance, I was pretty well a beginner. Well, I stayed there as a teacher for 8 years and formed a little company myself, and we toured all over the country. I belonged to a company called the Orcases Group before I started my own group, and it's really through them that I got my experience of touring. And touring in England at that time was absolutely, well, it was awful. I mean, you had to stay in a boarding house, you had cold floors, you were in cold buildings, there was no such thing as a dance floor, you got splinters all over your body, but you did get people who came as an audience and who enjoyed it. And we also toured all the colleges of education then, of which there were many, giving performances to try and inspire other young people to want to be dancers, or to at least experience dance as an art form. There were no real big companies for contemporary dance, or modern dance as it was called, not for a while, not really till Rambert Company was formed. Otherwise, it was the Royal Ballet, and many people's tastes were limited by it. I think for me, what I began to know as the Jooss Leeder method was always the passport to the future. I felt that I was technically improving, but I also felt that something was happening inside me, that I was beginning to grow emotionally. And I think this has something to do with the training, because Laban, in his attempt to codify the essence of the training of the dancer, the essence of the moving human being, had really in his philosophy got to the point where he saw dance as an art form which related to the collective unconscious, to the inner world of man, the rhythms of the universe. This is all very deep, but sometimes a simple understanding of the depth of the relationship between people and their world is very important. It's a rhythmic thing. And I don't want to go into more detail at the moment. I chose to stay with this Jooss Leeder approach until I was invited to go as a teacher, or, if you like, inspirer of young people in a new theatre department, which was up in Hull, which is in the ends of the earth. Hull, Hell and Halifax are supposedly the three worst places in England. Well, it's right on the coast, it's in the north, it's cold, but it's friendly, and the people reminded me of the people from the Isle of Man. This drama department was an incredible thing. There was in process then, when I arrived, the building of a new theatre by a very famous designer for theatre buildings called Peter Morrow. It was funded by the Gulbenkian Foundation, which was an important sponsor of the arts in our country. And the head of department was an inspired person. His major background was in the study of French literature, but he was so broad, so wide, that he appointed someone who'd mainly danced in their life to his department staff. And he gave me the freedom to work within the theatre. I had to direct plays, to evolve documentary plays, to build projects with the students to take them into the world of the major eras of theatre history. I had to do so many things that I knew nothing about, but the students were also beginners, and in some ways this kind of relationship worked. It was really one of the happiest working times of my life, one of the most inspirational, and the one which educated me in the world of the theatre. After then, I went to the place which was the Martha Graham School, which had been founded in this country by Robin Howard. And I went there because I was invited to go and work creatively with the students, whereas the main emphasis of the student training was in the Graham technique. I had to learn the Graham technique. That was quite a long and hard time. But I worked also with the most inspiring young people. and it was worth it. I also then, after a year in the school, was invited by Jane Dudley to be her professional assistant, which was an extraordinary opportunity for me. She was what I would call a grande dame of the theatre, an enormous personality, a highly educated, artistic performer, a person whose way of life I came to respect, and who to a certain extent took me further on the journey of educating myself. It was like from Hull to the place was jumping into the fire of uncertainty again. But that seemed to happen more times in my life than I can remember. Because if you work in the creative arts, it's always the unknown which you're stepping into. I think every teacher, if they really are an honest teacher, approaches their work because of who they are. And the joy of Jooss Leeder training is that it gives you a freedom to create material for the training of dancers, of actors, of teachers, through the basic principles which Laban evolved. I suppose I was a bit surprised when I had a contact from somebody called David, who was Reinhild Hoffmann's rehearsal director. Now, I didn't know anything about Reinhild Hoffmann. I knew a lot about Pina Bausch. By this time, I had met and worked with Jooss several times. He came to the university. He gave lectures at the university. He taught my students. And he helped me with a solo that I was working on for a program. Later, he came to the place when I was on a 1-year course there. I went for 1 year and then there was a little gap. And I think, although I don't know, that it was partly through his suggestion that I eventually ended up in the position that I had at the place. I've been a bit confusing there. I was invited to go for a year to teach improvisation. Then I went back to Hull, and after another 18 months, I was invited by the place to come to work there full time. Again, all these experiences build inside you. You don't really know what's happening. And when I say I was contacted by David Armstrong, who was Reinhild's rehearsal director, I didn't even think that there might be anything in it for me. So he wanted to bring Reinhild to visit the school, which he did. And she wanted to watch me teach, which she did. Oddly enough, the first class she watched was a dance history class. She should have been part of it, but I was not knowledgeable enough of her to say that then. Anyway, after that, I was invited to become the rehearsal director for Reinhild's company. And I accepted the offer. My German was pretty bad. It would be the first time I ever worked in a big theatre like a German opera house. But oddly enough, even although I was by now 50, I was still mad enough to jump into that opportunity. So this brought me directly back in touch with the Folkwang tradition, with Jooss's work, and to understand Reinhild and her part in the picture of the development of contemporary dance in Europe. It's like there were 3 important choreographers, Pina Bausch, who almost everybody now has heard of because of the extraordinary work which she did, Susanna Ninka, who is also fairly well known, and Reinhild. Reinhild and Susanna never quite reached the peaks of Pina, but each was independent and interesting in their work. So I had company class, I had rehearsals, I had organisation. It was all very, very intensive. And then one of the teachers at the Folkwang Hochschule, Malu Araudu, when she was pregnant, wanted somebody to take over just for the last time. And I'm not quite sure who it was who suggested me. I have no idea. But I went to the school thinking it would be interesting. And I had to teach 5 classes, a whole week of classes, for Hans Zulig, who was the chair of the committee, deciding whether they would employ me or not. Zulig was another people out of this, coming from the world which seemed to have been part of my life since I was a tiny child. And interestingly enough, with him, I felt totally at home. And when he was talking to me about it and giving me a criticism of the way I taught and so forth, it was like what he said was meaningful. And when he had watched me teach, he'd seen a video of me teaching at the place, he said he'd been a bit surprised that I was able to work with this technique. And so I had to explain to him the whole story of Lisa, who was ballet mistress with the Ballet Jooss after her ballet training, who came to England with Jooss and the Folkwang Company to Dartington in 1933, could be 32, need to check that. But Zulig was at Dartington with Jooss. So Zulig shares the history of what I shared. We were just in different countries, working in different ways. And Lisa always used to say it was like a Zeitgeist, which is a German word for saying there was something blowing in the air. And when it blew in the air, it blew all over the world. In America, you had the modern dancers, Graham and all her cohorts. In Europe, you had Sigurd Leeder and everything that evolved from that, including Pina. And in England, you had a smaller evolution, but you had a very good school. What's evolved out of the school is a bit disappointing, but that's the present. And all schools go up and down, depending upon the personnel within them. So I was eventually asked at Folkwang to run the pedagogic course for the students, who were by then, if they chose to study pedagogic, in their 4th year. And this was like a dream job, because it was as if it integrated everything that had gone on in my life. And for that, I was very grateful. Lucas asks me at what point I think this work is understood by the students. I would say never, because you go on learning throughout your life. And so you never have a full grasp of the material which you have, because it's to do with your human self, your potential, your spirit, your desires, your ambition, and your humility, and if you work within this environment, it just goes on forever. Things that I may have thought I understood when I was 20, I certainly know now I didn't. But that doesn't mean to say that the essence of what I thought I understood was not something I grasped. It was just that every essence grows, just as every seed has within it many, many, many possibilities. It can die, or it can live. It can flower, or it can grow more leaves, and so on. Dance is an organic art form, and we live in a world which is a little bit too coloured by technology, so that when you meet students now, at the beginning of their training, unless they've had a really brilliant teacher, you have to work to give them freedom pieces of paper don't mean anything. They do sometimes give you the qualification for a job for which you may not be qualified. Thank you.